Hi everybody and welcome. We're delighted to have here today Adam Jones, who is CTO of Seccl, who's going to be talking to us about all manner of different things and his experience in the industry. Adam, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start by talking a little bit about what your current role is, what your current position is, and what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. So I'm Chief Technology Officer for Seccl.
Yep.
Seccl are an investment platform technology company, and our mission basically is to help people to invest and invest well. And we do that by building technology that underpins the retail investment space.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay, you had quite an unusual route, I think, to get into that position. Tell me about your kind of route from the ground to the sky, as it were.
Yeah, so the ground was involved. So I left school and didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went to work in a tea factory. Okay. Because why wouldn't you?
Yep, exactly.
Turns out it was the only job you could get in Dorset, where I grew up.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I know there's a lot of TED Talks on it, working in the tea factory isn't that good. It's not that fun.
There you go.
So I thought I might not do this forever. I will try and take a material step up and go and work in a call centre instead.
Great.
So did that. Did a few admin jobs, bounced about a little bit, and I landed at a company called EDF Energy. So working in their customer service department, doing very basic admin stuff, copying and pasting spreadsheets. I'm sure it's automated now, but I was cheaper.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Well, you'd hope so. It might not be. But yeah, and I sat next to someone a lot smarter than me, and they said, you can automate your own job by building a database. And I said, that sounds very interesting because I prefer reading books to doing this. Let me learn more about that. And basically figured my way around databases enough that I could automate away my own job. And I thought, actually, that's quite interesting. I'll do a bit more of that. Chain of events ended up basically doing tech in my day-to-day at EDF. But I also got quite bored and did a degree in archaeology. So that's where the ground bit comes in. So yeah, did a degree in archaeology, did a postgrad in archaeology, and ended up in this position where I thought, okay, I can either do a PhD in archaeology or I can try and pursue a career in technology. And that has to be somewhere else because I'm in the customer service bit of an energy company that's not supportive of that. So there aren't that many jobs in archaeology. There are some jobs in technology. So that basically made my decision for me. Applied for a range of tech jobs. There was this job called a business analyst, which I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with. And it was, technical enough that I could make a strong case that I could do it, even though I didn't have the right education. I didn't have a computer science degree or anything like that. Applied to a whole load of companies and ended up working for a company called FNZ. Now they make investment platform technology. So they are in the space that I'm in at the moment. Joined them. First experience of financial services, first experience of a proper tech job.
Proper learning curve as well, I imagine.
Huge learning curve. Did that for a few years and then went to do some consulting because I found that I was kind of keen to just experience different workplaces and different technologies. So stayed in financial services, worked for about 30 different companies over a few years. And then ended up at a company called Readington, which was the company before Seccl for me. So this was 2017, where I had my first CTO role looking after technology and what that meant for them as a firm.
And that's interesting. So do you think that there is a natural progression from being very kind of hands-on to being strategic? Or do you think it's much more of a kind of like amorphous barrier that you float back and forth between?
I think there can be a progression, but I think it's more about like the skills that you pick up along the way. And sometimes if you've got like a leadership role, you still have to be hands-on. You still have to help the team to figure out issues or think about processes and the way they run. And equally, if you end up being purely strategic, I think you can lose sight of the reality of the business that you operate in. I also know a big lesson for me was, how big a company do I want to work for? I work for EDF, I don't know, 10,000 people or whatever.
Huge,
way too big for me. Great fit for some other people. I know that my sweet spot is kind of 100 to 200 people where I feel like I can make material impact and change. And in doing that, I know that I have to be a strategic leader and I also have to sometimes be hands-on. A bit different than a startup where I probably have to be hands-on all the time, and that's probably not for me either. So there's a bit of personal recognition, I suppose, as to what I'm good at, but also just having tools that you can use depending on what's needed.
Yeah, interesting. And I think you're right about that size of company. You know, you do have to kind of wear both hats. And also, I think if you're in technology, you have to keep up with things all the time as well. Do you think, or do you think that's not necessarily at a strategic level?
No, I think you do. And I think it's the whole kind of the impact that they can have on you. Like when I was consulting, I finished my consulting career as head of innovation for a company called Altus, and my job was basically to help financial services businesses figure out what the impact of emerging technology would be. Recognizing that if you're the chief operating officer of an insurance company, it's not necessarily in your day-to-day to figure out whether blockchain is going to change the way you operate. So there was definitely a bit of being able to provide some of that knowledge and insight into businesses. So it's almost like the leadership team had to know this stuff, but they didn't have to be the people who did the research on it. There's plenty of big consultancies whose mainstay is providing strategic advice into exec roles, and that's kind of why.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So there you are. You're 2017 or so. You're CTO. You're at Readington. You know, tell me about that role. What was it you were trying to achieve there, and especially with Ada, the platform that you helped develop there?
Yeah. So I joined, and Readington is an investment consultancy, probably one of the preeminent independently owned investment consultancies, and their customer base is professional investors. So it's pension schemes, it's local governments, it's wealth managers. And I think, I don't know the numbers today, but certainly when I left, they had about £650 billion worth of assets that they advised on. So this would be, I don't know, a big pension scheme's got 20 billion quid. What do they do with it so that they can safeguard the future of their members and make sure the money grows? And I joined into an industry that was quite traditional, probably the fair word for it. So very much kind of, we're going to have a quarterly meeting, we want a 100-page PowerPoint, we'll turn through it, and then we'll be done. And that is generally a very inefficient way of running meetings. It's an inefficient way of providing analytics, and it's quite in-depth analytics because it's all about investment in strange and esoteric assets and what they've done. So I basically had two jobs given to me from the board. The first was to digitize the consultancy. So how could we move away from this really traditional model? And then the second, if we were doing that, was, well, do other people have the same problem as us? Could we build a fintech off the back of that? Could we take those solutions and sell them on? So that's what I did. So, I started and had 6 people, no product. We didn't have a tech business per se. And I left, and we had a thing called Ada that you mentioned. So that is a fintech that operates. It's part of Readington, but it operates as an independent business. There are about 60 people, I think, that work for the Ada business, and it services probably about 60 clients, either through the consultancy or as a standalone thing. So now, if you're on the trustee board of a big pension scheme and you sign up to Readington, you won't get your PowerPoint, you'll get someone who says, here's a dashboard, you can log in, you can see the live performance of your assets, you can figure out what you really need to make decisions on. This is a better way of running the world. And equally, if you run an investment research team, you could buy the Ada platform and it would help you run your day-to-day business. It would put you in a better position in terms of regulatory compliance and in terms of operational efficiency. So that was kind of the journey. And 5 years, I think, so quite a lot of learnings for someone who'd not had a leadership role.
I can imagine.
We got to a good place in the end.
Great, brilliant. And I imagine that particular space is also highly regulated as well. So did that impact what you could do, what you couldn't do, or did you have to go through an approval cycle with financial authorities? Or
I mean, it's not. So yes, is heavily regulated, that space, and also Seccl, which is with retail investment, still very heavily regulated. I think there's a bit of a narrative often in our industry, which is that the fact that it's regulated is a barrier to innovation. That's something that gets trotted out quite a lot. I'm not convinced by it myself, because I think the regulator is there to engage with people when they want to run new initiatives. I think it's hard with retail investors, especially when it's like there's a potential impact, and how do you test something on someone? It is their life savings. How do I figure this stuff out?
Common mistake.
That said, I think across those experiences, and maybe also my time consulting, I think a bigger barrier to change is just the amount of legacy technology in the financial services world. So The reason people cite regulatory change is that quite often there will be a change that requires something new, but because people are running on tech that's 20 years old that they don't necessarily own, they can't change, it becomes a regulatory issue. I mean, if the regulator said you need to introduce a new type of charging, that isn't inherently unreasonable. But if you can't manage that through, and you know, I mean, some systems are 30 years old. You know, if your change route is I need to go to market to find a COBOL contractor because I can't do it all myself, then obviously any change at that point becomes quite painful.
It is. So you know, you've done your stint at Readington. You've survived the COVID years and got through all of that, I imagine. Tell me about Seccl and what are you doing at Seccl?
Yeah, so Seccl is, like I said, we make investment platform technology. So what does that mean in real terms? Well, if you've got a pension or an ISA and you're invested in funds, we make the technology that makes that happen. So pick a nice client example, GoHenry, who make children's savings apps. They're a client of ours. We power their stocks and shares ISA. So if you sign up to GoHenry tomorrow and you say, I would like to put money into my kids' stocks ISA and go and buy Fund X, whatever it is they've got in there, then we're going to make that happen in the back end. And we were built as an API first business on up-to-date technology about 7 years ago, really with a view of saying this industry has innovation barriers because it's so legacy. If we could do something that was up to date and easy to work with, we could empower innovation among others. And so that's really the objective. We're pretty clear about wanting to do the boring bits in the nicest possible way. You know, we're not a consumer brand and don't ever intend to be. We very much are the engine that sits behind a lot of great consumer brands. And for us to do our job well means that they are scalable, secure, very efficient at doing a load of stuff like cash management, buying funds and investments, and all of the things that customers probably don't care about, but they really care that it happens properly. And the regulator cares that it happens well. So that's where we fit into the world.
Okay. You said something really interesting there. You said, so it was up-to-date technology 6 or 7 years ago. How do you maintain that? Because obviously there's you know, things change so quickly, and there's always the trap that what's great now in 5-10 years time is going to be the legacy. Do you have a process to maintain that, keep it up to date?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a couple of things. There's the way that we handle the use of different technologies and libraries, and that's about having a process that does force you to be up to date and to keep working through versioning. We actually think our architecture is a way of enabling that as well, and all architecture should be. So we use a thing called volatility-based decomposition, which I'd never come across before Seccl, but it's all about trying to encapsulate change down to the smallest known areas, so that actually when you do change things, because you have to change things, you don't have to change things all over the place. So, you know, it's just a particular design pattern and style that we use, but it does mean that if, for example, we had to change the trading provider that we use, the sort of outsource company, that's okay because we've encapsulated that change into a small place. The volatility is well understood, and therefore we could substitute that and not face material impact from that. So there's a bit around architecting for knowing change will happen, and then there's a bit around making sure that we're on an upgrade path for all of the technologies we use. Where possible, obviously, we're using very well adopted and highly used tech as well. And I suppose in our space, you don't really win prizes for doing anything overly esoteric in terms of we are a pretty straightforward technology company. We provide a front end, we provide an orchestrated API, we have database services that sit behind it. Where we're really focusing on making a difference is being incredibly scalable and, you know, commercially affordable for our partners. But, you know, we're running 130,000 clients on the platform, do 1 million API calls a day, and it's all about proving that scale point. That's how we win effectively.
Interesting, fascinating challenge as well for you to step into. So in terms of the kind of the future path for Adam, I know you were talking earlier on today about doing product and things like that. Tell us a little bit about where you're kind of going on this now.
Yeah, so I look after product, engineering, data, and IT ops at Seccl. So, you know, really great team of people, and it's an interesting one. We talked about the benefits and challenges to bringing product and engineering closer together from a leadership point of view and a sort of management point of view. I feel like there's a big benefit in having product and engineering as a sort of cross-functional team in and of itself, and I think it's unhelpful where you have too much of a separation.
Yep.
So the way that we view that and the way that I view the organisation design that sits behind it is to say, okay, well, at every level we should have cross-functional grouping of people. So, we should have head ofs who work together, and we should have people at tribe level who work together, and people at squad level who work together. And really, me having accountability for all of that is another way of just making sure that we have a joined up picture, because ultimately my remit really is what we build, why we build it, and how we build it. And that's a success factor in our business, and that sits alongside our commercial growth as a real enabler for that. So, having a structure that supports improvements in velocity and improvements in alignment to what our customers need, and making sure that that's what's on our roadmap is a really important thing. And it's been great for me, because I think as I've come through my career, I've certainly learned enough about myself. And for me, being very hands-on with what we're building, how we build it, making sure it's got the right technical footprint, is kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning, if you like.
Yeah. So one last question that we always ask everybody who we're interviewing is AI. Is it the destruction of mankind? Is it a useful tool? Or is it something somewhere in between that we perhaps don't know about at the moment? What are your thoughts?
It could be both of those things.
Okay,
Let's not be exclusive. So what is it today? Today it's a useful tool. And today it's a tool that probably is not well understood enough or well used enough. And I think for me, it's always been about, I've worked quite a lot with boards and people who are looking to invest money. It's about separating out cutting edge AI research, which if you're not already doing it, you shouldn't even think about doing it. And someone has already invested billions more than you in it. From usable AI tools. And actually usable AI tools have been in market for probably 5, 6, 7 years. Stuff like Watson services, AWS have their own cognitive services, Microsoft do. They already provide ways for companies to bring AI into what they do, right? So looking at cognitive speech recognition, for example, bring that into your services. And actually the best kind of retailers are already doing this, and they're using how they do their master data management, and they make use of these things. What we're now seeing in generative AI, so that the GPT-4 type work, is, I think, just a real enabler for knowledge workers to just do things more quickly. So I was using it a couple of weeks ago. It's like, well, I was interviewing for a role, like, can you give me 10 interview questions for this role? Great. But specifically, can you do it for the company I work for? Here's some context about the company. Go. Okay. Great. That is a really helpful thing that saved me half an hour, right? And if I can use that 10 times a week, that suddenly becomes really powerful. So I think that's where we are today. When I think of AI generally, I always think of like the specific use case, but I like to imagine like a horizontal, like an arrow. Yeah. I always think in the middle of the arrow is Einstein. Yeah. And no matter what task you're doing, for most people, most of the time, you can aspire to be Einstein good at doing that task. Yeah. So let's say it's writing job descriptions, right? I can aspire to be as good as Einstein at writing job descriptions. And actually for most people, at some point around there, I stop being able to be any better at doing that thing. With AI, you don't. You just keep going, right? And I can always get better at writing job descriptions. I can always get faster, I can always get more aware of it. So for me, the real exciting thing, and I think you've already seen it in GPT 3 to 4, is how much further can we progress through this? So the challenge then becomes, if we look forward a few years, it's like, well, it's knowing enough about these things to figure out how they are going to change our industries in order to really make the most of them. So I know that we're owned by Octopus Energy. Recently did a program of work where they were looking at bringing in AI into their call center software and how they manage their workload, and they saw that it's had huge positive impacts in their scalability and their volume, and I just think it's examples like that that people will learn from. Now, for us as a business, we don't have retail-facing contact, thus we don't have a big call center operation. But what we do is we process huge numbers of transactions, and we process lots of documents where we pull documents out and we receive documents in. So it's more of a challenge of, okay, well, if I could make the document review process better, or if I could make the document generation process more flexible, how could I start to use these tools in my day-to-day? So that's how I think that starts to play through.
Interesting. And do you think that there is a, for technical people, one of the questions that I often get asked, I'm sure you do too, by the team is, do you think that our role as programmers will be replaced in 5-10 years or so?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think it will be changed. I don't think it'll be replaced, but if you look at things like Copilot and GitHub, or if you look at just getting GPT-4 to do some coding for you, what it probably does is it allows you to automate away some of the simpler aspects of the job. Like with anything, like with me, we're writing interview questions. So like, if I can get it to generate massive sets of test data, if I can get it to write a whole load of unit tests for a system that should have had them but didn't have them because they weren't developed.
Or comment the code, that's the other favourite one.
Commenting the code, I think we generally in our industry do have a bit of an issue with documentation and understandability, so it won't be unusual if you're an engineer to go and work somewhere and be like, oh, how do I even start to understand this? The commenting the code thing is great, because what you can do is you can say, well, this system that was built whenever by whoever that doesn't work here anymore, I can set you on it and at least get an 80% good read as to what everything's doing, without an engineer having to dig into it. So suddenly they're more capable from day one at engaging with that. And so I think it changes the job of an engineer. And what it should do really is make the engineering job more about solving more difficult problems, which is what we want, right? That is, it's more engaging, and it's probably what people want to spend more of their time on and don't, because they have a lot of other stuff to do.
Okay, but it's not going to replace an archaeologist.
It's not going to replace an archaeologist because, it's not great at digging holes.
Exactly.
That said, if you look at the Boston Dynamics robots, I can see them replacing archaeologists quite quickly. But archaeologists are cheaper generally.
Good. Adam, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Cool. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.